Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
One of the traps that we can fall into, sexually speaking, is figuring out what we like and then turning the fulfillment of that desire into a mechanical series of repetitive experiences. So over time, what was once exhilarating becomes rote, dull, mundane. Now, if you're in a long-term relationship, you may perceive that as a failing of your partner and begin fantasizing about others as a way of bringing more diversity into your sexual experiences. And if you're single or dating, you may be enjoying a diversity of sexual partners, but if you're constantly leading them down the same path to fulfilling that desire over and over again, you're shortchanging yourself by failing to explore the universes of sexual pleasures that are available to you. So what if you were equipped with a simple practice, a technique, or a game even, that allowed both you and your partner a simple and safe way to explore more of your desires and to learn how to ask for more of what you want in the bedroom? Well, our guest today, Lila Donnolo, is going to equip you with one such game that, after hearing it, Brian and I can't wait to bring to our partners. So who is Lila Donnolo? She is the host of the popular Horizontal with Lila podcast, of which Brian and I have both been guests. The reason why it's called Horizontal with Lila is you actually lay down in a bed with Lila horizontally and have what she calls like a post-coital kind of sex talk. She hasn't been able to do that over the past year. She's had to do them virtually for obvious reasons. And this podcast was recently named by Marie Claire as one of the top sex podcasts of 2021. I'll link that in the show notes. Lila is also a sex and intimacy coach for those who long for more pleasure and desire a sexier, more fulfilling romantic relationship. I found Lila to be a master facilitator of exercises and games. I've been a part of a number of her facilitated events, and one of those you're going to learn today, that help you to expand your realms of sexual pleasure while also deepening intimacy both in and out of the bedroom. And she's also an expert in learning how to secure enthusiastic consent. So she teaches some communication skills that I found to be some of the best of anyone that I've ever come across. And you'll hear some of her languaging in today's episode. So in this episode, she teaches us how to cultivate a treasure trove of knowledge regarding the sexual desires that your partner holds and how to even help your partner cultivate more of their own knowledge and understanding of what they desire, help guide them to new realms that they haven't been able to go on their own. Why having a sexual ledger sheet? You know, the ledger where it's kind of like, well, I've pleasured you for 5 minutes. Now you need to pleasure me for 5 minutes. How that is a surefire way of killing sexual magnetism in the bedroom with your partner. Lila teaches us some language that you can use to build trust and deepen intimacy, again, both in and out of the bedroom. And then where we spend the majority of our time is one amazing game that she teaches us that you can play with your partner to unlock an entirely new dimension or multiple dimensions of sexual pleasure. And the same game can be used to enhance the pleasures that you already know you enjoy, but to bring out different flavors, different textures, to go deeper, to expand broader. You're going to really enjoy this conversation today with Lila Donnolo on how to ask for what you want in the bedroom. So Lila, it's dawning upon me that as we're recording this episode, that you are pretty much as far away from us physically as you could possibly be around the world in Bali, which is ironic because the first time that the three of us got together to record an episode for your podcast, I don't think there could have been any more closeness or intimacy because all three of us were lying horizontally in my bed recording that episode. So welcome back to the show, even from afar.
Thank you. It is a delight to be with you again, even virtually.
It's so good to see your face, Lila. I feel like in this pandemic, I had like people I was close with in my heart. And I haven't seen a lot of those people for so long. You're definitely like on that list. And it reminds me of pre-pandemic New York, big time growth. Because every time I get with you, somehow I'm growing and learning. So it's great to see your face.
Oh, and I haven't had a Brian hug in so long, and they're so enveloping and yummy. I miss them.
I can speak to that. And I had one recently, and it was enveloping. I was enveloped.
Good for you.
So Lila, maybe explain to our listeners who have no idea why we would have all been in my bed, laying down together, recording an episode for your show, why we were all in that particular set and setting.
My podcast, Horizontal with Lila, is always recorded lying down, wearing robes. I'm still wearing a robe now, even on The Great Man Within, because I am nothing if not thematic. And there is a great, raw, vulnerable intimacy to taking things from the vertical to the horizontal. So when I use the word horizontality or the word horizontal, I mean it literally. Yes, we were lying down next to one another. I also mean it metaphorically. So when you are lying down, unless you are injured or something like this, or ill, you are comfortable. If I'm not comfortable someplace, I'm not going to lie down, right? So automatically you're in this liminal space. You're in this different space than you would be if you were in a social or a work setting. So you automatically just take the weight off of your feet. It spreads out. You start to settle. We're sort of like the Buddhist metaphor of the jar with the mud in it, and we're all shaken up all the time. Right? So the dirt is it's just all cloudy and it's all brown, it's all muddy. And when we lie down, it starts to settle and the water starts to clear. And so there's this sense that we are all post-coital together, or we're all stargazing together. We're on a long road trip together. We are somehow next to one another, shoulder to shoulder, looking out at the future together, musing together. There's this dreamy, close, intimate quality. And most people have never laid down in a bed with someone who was not their lover or their child. So it is just unusual. And in that unusualness comes all kinds of revelation and revealing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, because as Dominic and I were talking about that recording, we're like, that was an edge for us. It was an edge to lay horizontally, especially with another guy in the bed next to you. And I had forgot my robe, so I was boxers only.
Oh, yes.
And I still look back at that photo, and I feel like I felt so uncomfortable. And it didn't take long once we did settle into getting into a really deep podcast. So it was absolutely an edge for me.
When you're lying down, things do slow down a little bit. You should hear Brian's like bedroom voice.
Oh, it's good.
It gets a little bit deeper. It gets a little bit slower for any. But let's talk about this for a second too, because so Brian was just in his like underwear. I'm in my boxers and a robe. And you were laying in the middle of the bed,
yes.
right? So there was like the Lila buffer in between the two of us.
Lila sandwich.
And your episodes are longer form, right? They're about 2 hours. And somewhere in the middle, you had to get up and go pee. And you'd asked us a question and you're just like, just keep talking, right?
Oh, yes.
And so you get up to go to the bathroom and go pee. And there's this moment where I realize I'm laying in bed half naked, like horizontally, and staring into Brian's eyes as we're talking about this. And so it was really strange and uncomfortable for a few moments. And we were waiting for you to get back to kind of like fill that void again. But what was interesting was I told that story to so many of the heterosexual guys that I know, and they all had the same responses, right? They laughed. They thought it was hilarious. They thought it was an uncomfortable situation. When I came to one of your workshops at the Hacienda, which is where you used to live, and we can talk about that in a few moments, but it's a sex-positive house, I told that story to a few men there. The story, I'm waiting for kind of like laughter at the end because it's this uncomfortable situation. And I told it to these two guys who were also straight men, at least the way they identified and what they shared with me, but they didn't laugh at the end of that story.
Right.
And they were kind of like, yeah, I remember when I used to be uncomfortable around other guys, like who weren't clothed. And it was kind of like this moment of, wow, I like being talked to like I was a little kid, or immature little kid who still got upset at those kinds or, weirded out by those things. And it actually woke me up to say, well, yeah, why is that still something that I'm uncomfortable about? And it led to kind of one of those reflective moments of, is there still that latent homophobia that has been indoctrinated into so many of us straight men?
It is deeply ingrained and very difficult to unravel and peel back the layers of, because it's all over our media. What you're describing is a moment in a comedy, right? A moment in a comedy. The woman gets up from in the middle, the two guys look at each other and they're all freaked out and it's awkward and it's funny. Why is it funny? Because the society has indoctrinated our men with homophobia, with this sense that is just a terrible and ridiculous thing. And I was remembering I saw this video of two brothers, adult brothers, probably in their 30s or 40s, cuddling one another and talking about how this should not be taboo. This should not be weird. This should not be a source of derision or something to laugh at. I mean, you can enjoy it. It can be silly and fun and you can laugh. There's no moratorium on laughter and having silliness. And for instance, when I lead an exercise in which people are eye gazing, I always say, this isn't an exercise in not laughing. It's an exercise in being present with one another. If laughter is what comes up, because awkwardness is what comes up, or there's some feelings around whatever, I'm not used to this, and there's discomfort and there's laughter that comes up, then that's what's truly there. Fine. But wow, how divorced we are from our true nature of desiring love and care and affection, that we should find it abhorrent and unacceptable between people because of their gender and sexual orientation.
And when you say it's deeply ingrained, and it starts early. I was in third grade, and if you guys remember the third grade time period in your life, there was usually story time at school. So I had Mrs. Padell, my third grade teacher, reading us a book. We're all sitting on an Indian style, like in a circle. And all of a sudden I feel somebody scratching my back, which I love. Love language number one is touch for me. Didn't know that at the time, but somebody's scratching my back. And I turned around and it was one of the guys in my class. And even though it felt good, I told him to cut it. I turned around and I said, stop it.
Yeah.
And he didn't. And he kept going. So I turned around and I bit him right in the arm.
Wow.
And it was the only time I got in a lot of trouble. And I remember at that age, I remember wondering, I'm like, man, it felt good. I was kind of okay with it. But like, why was I so angry?
Right.
Why was I so angry that it was a guy when I turned around that did that? That's like seared into my memory. And then about a year and a half ago, Dominic and I were at a party. We were all hanging out on these couches. And all of a sudden I feel somebody scratching my head. Literally one of my favorite spots on my body to be touched. And I looked up at who it was, and it was a guy that I didn't know very well.
Tell me you bit this guy's arm too.
Same feelings came back. I'm like, wait a second, why are you as a guy touching me? But we had a good conversation earlier in the night. I knew he was, there was no affront. And I just let it happen. I just let it release. And oh my God, it felt nice. It felt great. So it is ingrained. It does come from a young age, and we have an opportunity to do something a little bit different with it.
Yeah, you didn't bite him this time.
I've grown. I haven't.
So Lila, I think what would be really helpful before we get into the game, the one method and one tactic that you've brought for our audience that can help to cultivate some chemistry, some intimacy, both in and out of the bedroom.
Yes.
And also to heighten, communication with your partner. Maybe give a bit of your backstory about where you lived at the Hacienda for 5 years, what that community is, and how what you did there led to some of these practices and these games that you developed.
In 2014, I moved into this sex-positive intentional community in Bushwick, Brooklyn, called Hacienda Villa, which, yes, literally means house. And
that's like Taco Bell, where they have the 3 cheese queso, which is like 3 cheese.
Right. Or chalupa.
Yeah.
So Hacienda Villa, house. And it came out of a sex party community. It came out of a sex party called Hacienda that was going on for 7 years at one of the co-founders. One of the co-founders was a real estate guy, Andrew Sparksfire, and this was his house. He found out that play parties were a thing that existed. He got super excited, and he had a place, he had a space, and so he offered it up to people who were hosting play parties. That's the euphemism for sex parties that most people use. So he started throwing these parties at his house, and they were really elaborate. They were Burning Man-style parties. They each had a theme. There were elaborate costumes. People created installations just for this one night, this one party. And they grew to be, 200, 300 people parties, huge, huge parties with a very strong community element where everybody was contributing and nobody was making any money. It wasn't a for-profit enterprise. So that allowed everybody to feel free to bring their talents and skills and things that they did professionally, like as costume designers or prop stylists. They would make things for these parties. And then that community became so tight-knit and so bonded that he thought, it would be really interesting to get a brownstone, gut renovate it, and turn it into an intentional community for these people to do an experiment in living together in a sex-positive way that would celebrate sex in all of its consensual forms, that would celebrate everyone's right to choose their own sexual path, for it to change, and to choose their relationship style, and for it to shift with who they love and who they sex, depending on the time and depending on the people. So he founded this house in Brooklyn, about 5 blocks away from the original house, and it had 14 bedrooms. It still does. It has 14 bedrooms. It's a 3-story building, and in the basement, there was an event space. His vision was to create a place that would be a platform for all of us who lived there to make our projects, to develop, to self-actualize what we are meant to do in the world, to give us a venue for that and a space. And to be frank, the reason why I was initially interested in it was because I saw on Facebook that it had a hot tub. And I was like, oh my God.
The clincher.
A hot tub in Brooklyn. Like, I never thought that I would be able to have such a thing, right? And at first I didn't think that I would qualify to live there because as it was written about, it was really sensationalized. And what they thought was going to be appealing and clickbaity was to call it a poly house or a polyamorous house. So I didn't think I qualified to live there because I didn't identify as polyamorous. And then when I talked further with the guy who was the real estate guy at the time, and then with Kenneth Play, who's the other co-founder, I understood that it actually wasn't that you just needed to be sex positive, you needed to be accepting and open to other people's lifestyles. And I was like, oh, well, I've got that on lock. That is no problem. Accepting and open-minded, yes, got it. And then also curious and questioning and exploring, because I have been and continue to be that way. So I lived there for 5 years. And shortly after I moved in, I wound up co-writing the principles. We had 10 principles that we were living together, ideals to aspire to in our life together.
What was one of them that you were particularly proud of authoring?
Well, I really love responsible hedonism.
Ooh, what's that?
So if you're hedonistic, you're pleasure-seeking, right? You're out for what feels good. You're out to fulfill your desires. And that can be taken to a great and Machiavellian extreme. But if you are a responsible hedonist, then you're paying attention to how it makes you feel to do these things, how it affects others, the impact you have on others when you are pleasure-seeking in this particular way, and you endeavor to reduce harm. You're trying to have the most amount of pleasure with the least amount of harm. So we co-wrote those, and we also came up with guidelines. We had plenty of agreements and plenty of what I would call rules, because living together in intentional community requires agreements and rules. In order to do that well and healthfully and in a way that is respectful of the people involved. And so one of the rules we had, which I call a rule, Zed doesn't call it a rule. Zed says it was an agreement or a guideline or a suggestion. Regardless, it was something that we all endeavored to pay attention to. We didn't have sex with one another. So the assumption that people would always make when they heard about the house was, oh, you're all fucking each other. It must be a constant orgy all the time. And I would say we're actually not fucking each other. We actually have a guideline against that because it reduces the amount of drama by an unbelievable degree. Because the rule was in place not to prevent people from having sex, to prevent the community from suffering because of the fallout of you having sex with somebody else and there being problems. Because the likelihood of there being problems when you have sex with your housemates is so very high.
Yeah, of course. And I think when you're hitting here, Lila, about like the perceptions that people have about, let's say 14 people who are living in a sex positive community that have sex parties on a regular basis, that, I would just even ask our listeners right now to pause and think about what that looks like in your mind. Like, what are your preconceptions of that? And I'd never been to a sex party before. I believe, Brian, have you been to the Hacienda?
I visited Lila there. We did. I don't know if we did an interview. Oh, we were talking business, I think. We had a meeting there. Yes.
But you never been to one of their play parties?
No.
Okay. Mm-mm. So I'd never been to one of the play parties. And so in my mind, and probably a lot of other people's minds, is like, you just think about people swinging from the rafters, just sexually, no holds barred. There's not a lot of talk or consent or thought put behind any of this. Like that's what a lot of people think of when they think of sex parties. When I've had conversations with people telling them that I've gone to the Hacienda, and the opposite I found to be the case when I walked through the doors. Like one of the first things that we had to do, especially as a new guest, was we had to go through an orientation that was led by you.
Yep.
And this was where like it just set the tone. And for 45 minutes, all of us newbies who had never been there before. And by the way, this place is beautiful. It's like spick and span. It's beautifully designed. It's
clean,
sexy. It's cool. It's clean. Yeah. And you notice that right away. Upscale. We went into this room and for 45 minutes, you did this brilliant, funny, inclusive consent conversation. Here's how you approach people. Here's how you start conversations. Here's how you respond to when they say no.
Yeah.
And you thank them. And you create these little games and you set the tone right off the bat, where I was able to walk around that party for 4 or 5 hours where I was nervous going in there, not knowing what to expect. And it was this respectful, beautifully open. You could go to places and like push the envelope and edges. And then you could go to other places where you could just take a break. And I left that party feeling like, wow, you talk about people who have really figured out communication, consent, responsible hedonism. And it blew my mind in terms of just what my perception was and what the reality of what you'd created was.
It's so beautiful to hear, because that is what we endeavored to do. We really wanted people to step in and feel warmly welcomed. We wanted our community to be so open, communicative, and connected that you would feel open and welcomed and supported in your endeavors and your curiosity when you step through our doors.
It's exactly what I ended up feeling.
That said, Dominic, I think I have seen photos of Lila swinging from the rafters. So part of that, in costume, by the way. So part of that's definitely true, but the rest of it's all garbage. Yeah.
That is true. And maybe we'll have some time to get into that, because one of Lila's things is she loves those ropes, and you do some incredible work on the ropes. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. I want to get into these games, methods, and tactics that you created yourself. One of the things that you're brilliant at is you're a creator, you're a master of ceremonies, you love facilitating workshops that are so much fun.
Yes.
That quickly remove and dissolve these barriers that we have, of intimacy and connection. So for our listeners who are always interested in creating more intimacy in and out of the bedroom, you've got a couple of tools for us. So where would you like to start?
I'd like to start with the Stoplight Game, and I must admit that I did not create this game. I have, I believe, deepened and adapted it to my tastes and for my purposes, but I did not make it up. I learned it in a workshop, and the workshop was called Liquid Love, and it was a naked coconut oil slip and slidey experience with blindfolds and bodies.
Thanks for the new fantasy.
Hey, Brian, we should think about that for the next men's retreat.
Yeah. That's if you haven't been to a men's retreat, you assume that's what happens. So I don't know if we need to go. Yeah, I need to go that direction.
Blindfolds and bodies.
If you did that, I mean, you just presented it as a joke, like we were talking about before. If you did that, it would be revolutionary. I don't know that it's an edge that you want to go to, but it is so out of people's heterosexual norm that you would probably create some catharsis there.
I'm so glad this just happened, because every time we get with Lila, something like this happens that feels incredibly uncomfortable.
And we're already there.
And incredibly enlightening, right? Because like my mind just went through 85 revolutions of like, no fucking way. Like, no, no fucking way. Right? Like, why would I do that? Like, what's the benefit of that? Like all of the defenses came out. So I'm not planning on doing that, but thank you, Lila. We hit that edge.
Yes, thank you, Lila.
I love you both so much. I really do. I love that you're able to come to that so quickly, right? Because the distance between the defensive response and your realization of it is so small that you're able to have this conversation almost instantaneously in the moment. Now, that is somebody who's done the work. I'm really proud of you.
Thank you. Take that.
That feels nice. Thank you for the recognition.
I interrupted you, Lila.
The Stoplight Game. The Stoplight Game is a way for us to discover what our partner likes, doesn't like, and why. So obviously a stoplight is very simple. It has 3 colors. There's a green, a yellow, and a red. Beginning with one partner, probably lying down because it's most comfortable that way, the other partner begins to touch them and just tries things. So there's probably a time limit. Let's say it's 5 minutes. It doesn't matter how long it is. Let's say it's 5 minutes. And you're looking for responses. So you're trying different things. You're trying, hair pulling. You're trying stroking and caressing. You're trying squeezing. You're trying tapping. You're trying all different kinds of things to see where are the borders here. And your partner who is receiving the touch is saying green, yellow, and red based on how they feel about this kind of touch. If it's a green, great. But don't just leave it at that. That's what we did. We got greens and we're like, okay, great, they like that. And then we try something else. If it's a green, now we can start to play. We know that they like this. Do they like it at a different volume? Do they like it if we turn the volume on the intensity up? Do they like it if we turn the volume on the intensity down? Play with speed. Do they like it if it's faster? Do they like it if it's slower? Do they like it if it almost doesn't happen at all, but then it is intermittent and surprising? Play with pressure. Do they like more pressure? Do they like less pressure? Play with location. Do they like this thing? Is this thing a green if you do it on their foot? If you do it on their scalp? If you do it in between their cheeks? If you do it on top of their pubic mound, right? Is it still a green in all those different places? And then also play with timing, right? I mentioned that intermittent thing. By the way, the intermittent pleasure is known to be the most addictive form of pleasure, right? And if you've ever been attracted to an unavailable person, as I have, you know that hit of when they do pay attention to you and turn their light on you, you're like, oh my God, it feels so good. Oh my God, it feels so good, right? And then they take it away. And you're like, oh, jonesing. And then they give it to you and you're like, oh my God, this is so good. So
that's like how slot machines are built. Like
yes.
You don't know, it's that variable reward that has no rhyme or no reason. And for some reason that absolutely activates the human psyche and the reward centers.
Yes. Will I get it? Will I not? Will I get it? Will I not? So you can play with that. Knowing that about human beings, you can play with that. You can play with giving it all, right? So like all at once, doing a bunch of things all at once, so you can really play with these, let's see, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things I mentioned. Volume, speed, pressure, location, and timing.
It's awesome.
So those are green.
And Lila, just for clarity here, like we're doing this with our partner, and is the partner saying green? Or is it assumed green, and then when something red happens, or is it, like, can you just explain how that communication works?
Yeah, the whole point of this game is to make what you think is implicit explicit. So you want them to speak everything. You want them to say green every time and keep saying green if it's green as you change things, or they'll start saying yellow or red as you change things. You want to have that verbal feedback constantly. And that's something that you probably won't do in bed unless you're doing, as Alexa would call it, a sexploration date, where you're trying this as part of your sexploration. You're probably not going to have this level of communication, which is why it's a game. It's an exercise. It's something that we do outside of probably our regular lovemaking, our regular fucking.
I love this game. I mean, it's so simple and so brilliant. I mean, I'm just thinking about like, if I had this communication tool in so many other scenarios, I could have dialed up my own pleasure, or I could have like kind of ended some stuff that wasn't really working for me. For example, my nipples are a dead zone. There's no sensitivity on my nipples at all. And I remember this like one lover where maybe it was like one of our first few times together. She was going to town on my nipples. Like it, you know what I mean? I mean, she was just pulling out her best and all the stops, and she was so into it. And I'm sitting there, I'm like not feeling a thing. And how do you communicate that when she's just giving it the old college try?
Yeah, it's so difficult in the moment. And there are ways that you could do it, but I find it also very difficult, right? You could be like, oh my God, that level of attention from you and specificity and changing it up feels so good. Could you do that on my butt? That would feel amazing.
Right.
Right. You could do it, but it is challenging and you have to have some language around it. And you have to be willing to interrupt. And that thing I find very, very tricky, not just for women, but definitely for women, to change your mind, right? To interrupt something and say, actually, that's not doing it for me. Or you don't have to say, the way that I usually frame it is in a desire. So I don't say that's not working for me. I usually say, would you? I would love it if. It would so turn me on if, oh my God, I just want you to do this so bad.
Nice. As you're saying that, I could even feel my, the desire to fulfill whatever it is that you want.
Yeah.
It starts to kick up. I can feel that.
Yeah. So then we talk about yellows and reds. And yellows, as we all know, means like slow down, or I'm not sure, or maybe, or this isn't so great for me. But the yellows, this is a very interesting zone. Why is it a yellow? What makes it a yellow? And so this I find to be the most fascinating piece of the game. So is it a physical yellow? My nipples are a dead zone. That might be a physical red for you. But if it's somebody who sometimes gets pleasure from their nipples, or it has to be done in a very particular way, that might be a physical yellow. Is it an emotional yellow? Like, ooh, you're getting close to a zone where I have a lot of stuff around. For me, the anus is that zone. It's like if you're getting close to there, I'm like, I'm not sure. What are you going to do now? Like, what are you going to do?
What's your next move?
What's your next move? Where are you going with this? Where are you going with this? So, and for me, that's usually an emotional yellow. There's something that I'm feeling about that. Is it a psychological yellow? Is it a mental thing? Like, oh, hey, when you do that, I get really up in my head. Or I start analyzing when you're focusing on that thing. And that's not where I want to be, Or, here's a very interesting one. Is it a social or societal yellow? Is it something that I don't want you to do because I'm not supposed to want that? I'm not supposed to want you to throat
butt
fuck
stuff for
me
guys.
Or butt stuff.
Like guys and butt stuff.
Sure.
Are these flavors of yellow, is this something to be discussed in the moment, or is this in the recap afterwards?
I am suggesting, Brian, that it is all done in the moment. All of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it is part of the game. It is not a recap. It's happening in the moment. You say yellow, and then it's like, what kind of yellow is it? And then beyond that, I want to drill down into where does that come from, right? So what's the story behind it? What does it remind me of? And I'll share one with you that's very vulnerable for me. The reason why the anus is an emotional yellow for me is because I have had indigestion problems in my life, my whole life. And so I feel really scared whenever something starts to happen around my anus because I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if it's going to be okay. And I have all of this emotional pain around being sick. And there's also some generational trauma there too. My mother had colon cancer, right? So there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of emotional stuff around the anus for me. And so disclosing that to a partner would be a way for them to know me better, know me deeply, for me to be vulnerable with them, to give them a chance to hold my vulnerability in a way that makes me feel safe, which allows me to be turned on.
Yeah. Lila, thank you for sharing that. And my heart opens when you bring that level of vulnerability. And without creating that environment where you can feel safe to express that, then if I were to be making a move to going towards your butt and then you just slap my hand away and there's no conversation around it, then I have no idea where that's coming from. It could, I can make up a whole bunch of different stories. And since you shared one, I'll add one to the list here too. Like butt stuff for me has also been something that's been a yellow or actually been a red for most of my life. But I shared this in a podcast we did a few months ago. I'm dating a millennial now. And she told me that millennials are the ass-eating generation. so like, one of our first few times together, like, she's down there, she's giving me head, and then boom, like her head's between my legs and she's licking my butt. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, not ready for it. It happened so fast.
Yeah.
And then she's like, what's wrong? And I'm like, I don't know, but like my butt's always been kind of this like one-way street. And when we did have a chance to talk about it afterwards, which wasn't in real time like you're talking about, I realized that it's that conditioning that I grew up in that you've already seen. Like we've made 2 jokes about it today, but that as a straight man growing up in the don't be gay generation, that there was this thing that I think I just adopted subconsciously, that my butt is not a place for pleasure. It's a one-way street. And if I were to ever open up around that, then it would have some sort of destructive identity complex around that.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that.
But we've gotten past that now, and now I'm enjoying it. I'm not like fully surrendered to it, but our version of the yellow stoplight has allowed us to expand my pleasure centers.
I love it.
Lila, something you said on the last podcast we did together was to go slow and then slower than slow and then slower than that. Yep. And that's something that has stuck with me, even if not executed well. It's stuck with me with what it can be. In this game, it feels a little bit like that. Like, let's go slow, let's learn in real time. And I think about what my partner and I could come away with in doing that, and the lessons associated with that without like any other expectation. So I think part of this is the game that we're talking about, but a big part of this is the container. Let's just sit down for 10 minutes. Let's play this. Let's play this game. I love it. It's such an easy approach.
And it gives you basically a treasure trove of knowledge about your partner that you can utilize when you're playing, and it's sped up, let's say, right? Because things do tend to happen fast. Unless you are deliberately slowing down to go slow, slower than slow, slower than that. Unless you're deliberately doing that, it's pretty likely that things are going to speed up and things are going to happen fast, and all of a sudden somebody's tongue is in your ass and you just don't even know. You're like, how'd that happen? Whoa,
And that makes a conversation very difficult with a tongue in the ass. You can't say a whole lot when that's going on.
Yeah, and also you might want to just carve out separate space for that. That's what I'm talking about here. You're carving out separate space for it. There are times when you just want to be wordless. And you just want to play and try and make nonverbal adjustments. And then I love that you downloaded afterwards. I love that you, Dominic, had the conversation with your millennial partner afterwards so that you could debrief, so that later on you could connect about that and talk about what happened in a post situation. That's super valuable as well. I'm certainly not saying always talk about it in the moment, just that this is a very useful thing because most of us don't do it. The last piece of the yellow is that after finding out which kind of yellow it is and what's underneath that, like, oh, this reminds me of, perhaps also you might unearth some trauma here, right? So it's like, oh, when you touch my earlobe like that, that's actually the way that my ex-boyfriend who abused me used to touch my earlobe. And so when I feel that, I just freeze up. My sympathetic nervous system freaks out and I freeze up and I cannot feel pleasure then So then you've learned something really important about them and you know why. In that case, this next question might not have an answer. But in the case of my anus situation, if we propose the question, is there any adjustment that would shift this yellow into an enthusiastic green? Then we can talk about the way that you do something or the intensity with which you are doing it or the location, right? If you were to do this in a different part of my body, right? Or for me, it's like if I know that you're not going to go inside, I'm very happy to have your tongue on my anus. That would feel wonderful. I would love that. If I know
that takes you from a yellow to a green.
That takes me from a yellow to a green.
That's such an important distinction. Like what could take this yellow to a green and that one little shift? How important is that?
And without the pressure that you have to figure out a way to take it from a yellow to a green, because there might not be that way.
Right.
But it allows you to start thinking about, is there a way? Is there a way that I could receive pleasure from this thing that I feel a little dodgy about right now?
I like this too, because oftentimes when I'm having a sexual experience, I actually want to stay out of my head. I just want to be there in the moment. But this container and game allows us to actually think, what do I actually like? So I think I've been envisioning this as you've been talking about it, Lila, as me as the doer and as the learner. I can see that going both ways. That would allow me to be in my head a little bit as something was happening to learn. So I think I could certainly learn about my partner. I could certainly learn about myself because I haven't thought about these things.
Yes.
Is my butt yellow or green? I don't know. It's somewhere. It's somewhere on the spectrum there. So yeah, this goes two ways.
If I wasn't clear, I want you to shift. I want you to trade places. I want both partners to experience this. Everybody has so much to learn.
And one of the things you set this up with, Lila, is it could start with, hey, we're just going to set a 5-minute container. It could be a 35-minute container, be a 60-minute container. You know what I mean? Because,
oh, yeah.
I mean, the body there's so many different places to explore. And you gave those different techniques of pressure, touch, volume, tempo. There's so many different ways that can be dialed up or down. To even go invite your partner into this and say, hey, for 5 minutes tonight, we're going to play this Stoplight Game. And I get 5 minutes to receive, you get 5 minutes to receive. You just start with that. And then to me, it sounds like something that could be so informative and fun and intimate that you could even set up, hey, tomorrow we're going to try this, or next week we're going to try for an hour apiece.
Yes, because it's very likely that this is going to open up all kinds of conversation and all kinds of interesting things that you're going to want to explore. So yes, it's not like a thing you do once and then you're done, you've done it. There's so much to investigate, so much to explore, so much to try. And then last, I wanted to talk a little bit about reds, right? So reds are very clear. It's stop, no way, don't do that. But do you know why? Do you know why? It's the equivalent, as you said, of batting the hand away. Do you know why? If you know why, maybe there's a lot of empathy that you can cultivate for your partner in that moment. If you know why, maybe you know some other things that won't be good for them that you might want to stay away from, So a couple of questions for that, and I mentioned one of them already in the yellow, was what does this touch remind you of? Because it's very likely if there is a red, a hard no, hard limit, a red, it's very likely that this kind of touch is meaningful to the person beyond the moment.
An example of that might be if we're talking about, say, hair pulling. And say the partner does not like to have their hair pulled, and it's hey, what about this, or a why, right? Is that a red for you? It could be, I was physically abused at some point, or I had my brother pulled my hair all the time as a kid and it really hurt. And it makes me think of my brother, and I don't want that here in the bedroom.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. And I think a nice question for that is, what makes this red? What makes this a red?
Got it.
And then another question that I think is absolutely crucial is, what fears does this bring up? So if you pull my hair and it reminds me of my brother, my fear is that I'm going to get totally turned off because I'm going to start thinking about familial stuff, and I don't want that in my bedroom, in our bedroom. I'm going to get turned off. I'm going to start to associate you with my brother, and I don't want that.
I can tell that my capacity for this kind of learning needs to increase because we're one game in here and I'm I have got months of work to do.
Right? I know.
just green, yellow, red. That's it. I'm not ready for game 2 or game 3.
I don't know. I don't even know if we're going to have time for games 2 or 3 because we've gone so deep on this one, but I think you're right. It's like this one game right here could literally be months worth of work and like lifetimes worth of pleasure. If you think about that, like you take one thing from a yellow to a green and you could explore that for the next year.
Woohoo.
That level, like that new area of pleasure, right?
Yeah.
Open up that ass, Dom. Open it up.
When you turn something around like that, the emotional bonds that are formed, the excitement around it, and the craving for it can be voluminous, can be enticing and passionate, you know? So yeah, it could turn into a year-long love affair with this particular sexual act that you didn't think you even could like.
Something that's coming up for me right now, I've read that this is a common experience for some guys. Most of my life, I actually couldn't fully surrender to the power of receiving a blowjob. Like I could receive for maybe a minute or 2 or 3, and then it was like, I got to be doing something. And then I would quickly put the woman on her back and then give her oral sex, or then, move to intercourse. And so I would say for about like 38 years of my life, that was my experience of receiving a blowjob. It was like 2 minutes maximum. Because I always felt like I had to be doing something. And then I was with a partner for about 3 years, sexual partner for 3 years, who she forced me to like slow it down. I was a yellow, I guess you could say, in receiving oral sex. And she was just like, no, like you're going to sit there and receive it. It's kind of like how, some people just like reject praise. You tell them like all the good things they do about themselves. They're like, no. It was these people who did all the, like they could only take so much of it in. I could only take so much pleasure in receiving orally. She actually just like was like, no, I'm going to give you a 20-minute blowjob. At first, I didn't know what to do with myself. I felt like as the time went on, I was like starting to calculate how much more I would have to reciprocate to her. Well, she gives me 20 minutes ahead. I got to give her 20 minutes ahead. And I could see all these weird things I was bringing into the scenario. When I finally like broke and learned she loved giving me oral sex. And then I learned to love receiving it. And so for like the next few years, it was just kind of like all the ways that she could give me oral pleasure, that I could receive it fully. She loved it. I learned to love it. And for those 3 years, like that became kind of our level of exploration. And I didn't really, we did explore other things, but that was plenty enough for me because it was that much pleasure.
Beautiful.
So you became an expert blowjob receiver.
Hey, for all the ladies out there who are interested, I'm amazing at receiving blowjobs right now.
I joke about that, Dom, about like becoming an expert blowjob receiver, but I've been exactly where you're at. I get that. It's like I have to be I have to be doing something. Otherwise, I'm not playing my part. So I do get that.
And I felt the same way as a woman. And I know a lot of women who have felt the very same way. It's really a problem with receiving. It's a problem with receiving, feeling that it's okay to receive without reciprocating, feeling that it's okay to receive without reciprocating in the exact same amount and the exact same way, the ledger sheet of relationshiping.
The ledger sheet. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feeling like it's all right to accept gifts. It's a very similar thing, right? And this is a beautiful segue into the next thing, should we want to approach it, because it's all about receiving.
So Lila, it turns out that because of the magical job that you did walking us through the Stoplight Game and how powerful this game and exercise is, we don't have time, unfortunately, to get to the other 2 tools and methods that you brought to the table today. However, we can save those for round number 2.
I love round 2s.
Who doesn't love round 2s?
We're going to need some time between round 1 and round 2, though. I think it's called a refractory period, but it could be off.
Naturally.
Hey,
yeah.
Speak for yourself, buddy.
I mean, I did just learn that I could give myself 3 orgasms in a row. I didn't know I could do that. It was amazing.
Ooh, congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Kind of jealous. Congratulations too. And we'll talk about that, I guess, in the next round number 2.
Yes.
Lila, obviously your podcast is amazing. Horizontal with Lila. Marie Claire named it one of the top sex podcasts of 2021. First of all, congratulations. That's an amazing accomplishment. We're going to link that in the show notes, but what else are you up to? Obviously, some of our guys are going to be blown away. Women and men are going to be blown away and want to work with you or follow you. where do they go?
I'm so excited about what I'm working on right now. You can find all things horizontal, horizontalwithlila.com. I have started coaching. I'm doing intimacy coaching. I have 4 different offerings, and one of them is a program, a 2 to 3 month program where we do 6 sessions over the course of the 2 to 3 months. I give you techniques, ideas, homework, or home play, as they like to say. You go away, you spend 2 weeks exploring, listening to things, watching things. The homework I gave my client last week was to write his wife a love letter. He went out, he bought stationery. He bought a fountain pen. He learned how to write with the fountain pen. He did a wax seal. He made his own envelope. You know, I mean, it was mind-boggling and gorgeous. And the assignment was to include a fantasy about her because he hadn't shared his fantasies. You know, so I get to give this wonderful homework that people want to do that enhances their intimate life. And then they have email access to me in between so they can check in about how things are going. So I'm pretty excited about offering that. It feels delicious to be able to work with people one-on-one in that way. I'm also working on a video course that hopefully will be out in the spring, How to Connect. And it's going to have 3 units: how to connect with yourself, how to connect with your lover, and how to connect with everyone. So I'm working on that video course, very excited to get that out into the world. It's going to compile things like the Stoplight Game, basically, 30 of them in one course, all of the most valuable techniques that I've amassed by interviewing these people, by doing my research, by reading all these books, by living at Hacienda and taking all these workshops. It's all going to go into this one course. And I'm working on a TED Talk about the different kinds of intimacy.
Oh, I cannot wait for that.
Me too.
That one's been marinating for a few years. I remember we got together at Hugh Kitchen in New York City because I had just given mine.
Yes.
And you were like, hey, I'm going to get me one.
That's right.
Are they doing a TEDxX?
That's a good question.
have not heard of that.
That's something we should push on.
TEDxX.
TEDxX. Go get yourself one of those licenses. You can build it and then speak on your own stage.
I mean, that's true. If I don't get TED Global or TED Women, I can just make one.
TED Bali.
Lila, this has been awesome. Brian and I are going to be bringing our Stoplight Games to our respective partners, and we'll report back to you.
Yes,
Let
please.
you know if we were able to get some yellows to greens. I'm going to also link in the show notes your podcast, your website, and then the episode that we did with you.
The 2 episodes, please. Yeah.
The 2 episodes that we did with you. And we have, I know one of the things that you do is you offer like the first hour of the recording for free, and then you have a Patreon count for that second juicy, delicious hour where you ask some even more intimate questions. How much is that Patreon per month?
$7 a month is the bottom tier, the barrier to entry. Yeah. And at this point, there are over 50 episodes behind the paywall.
Nicely done. Okay. Well then, thank you for round 1, Lila. Brian and I are going to go rest up, and then we'll get ourselves ready for round number 2.
Let's enjoy our refractory period, fellas.
All right, gentlemen, it is take action time. You have some very obvious and easy ways to take action from this episode. If you are in a committed relationship or if you're sexually active, you can absolutely take this game, the stoplight method, and start playing with the green, the yellow, and the red. If you're currently single right now, there's something here that you learned today that you can put into practice in your life to make sure that this doesn't just become some intellectual exercise of listening and consuming information, but you can bring it into your sex and intimacy life. Maybe even if you're single and not sexually interacting with someone, bringing some of the stuff that you learned in here to a pleasure practice, right? If you're masturbating, if you're watching porn of some kind, maybe even bringing a new level of exploration, curiosity to your pleasure practice and seeing if what you're exploring is a red, a yellow, or a green for you. That's one easy way that you can make it practical. And if you've got the courage, or you just want to see other guys who are talking about this stuff openly, head over to the Facebook group, share what you learned, or listen to and participate in conversations that other men will be having about this episode. Hey, did you get something of value out of this podcast? If so, I'm going to ask you a favor. Would you be so amazing as to go over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and a review? Your ratings and reviews can show someone who's just discovered our podcast for the first time that we are worth listening to. And that way we can reach a wider audience. So please head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and review.
You rock.